The silence of the sovereign, the night God fought alone. Imagine a night so extraordinary, so defiant of natural law, that it altered the destiny of thousands of lives and rewrote the history books of antiquity forever. It was a night that began not with the clang of swords or the roar of catapults, but with a suffocating silence, a silence heavy with mystery and latent power. It was a moment in time when hopes seemed to have evaporated like mist in the desert sun, and defeat appeared not just probable, but inevitable. There were no swords brandished by human hands, no guttural war cries tearing through the throat of the night. There was only the wind, whispering softly, almost mournfully, between the ancient, weathered stones of a city under siege. Something invisible was about to happen, something that human eyes could never fully explain, something that defied the logic of warfare and the physics of conquest. You are about to relive one of the most fascinating, terrifying, and mysterious events ever recorded in the history of humanity. This is the story of the night when God fought alone. What truly transpired in that decisive moment? How did an army considered invincible, a machine of death that had crushed empires, simply vanish without a trace of battle? We travel back to the year 701 before Christ. The location is Jerusalem, the city of David, the spiritual heart of a ragged and frightened kingdom. Jerusalem was known for its high walls, engineered to withstand sieges, and its resilient people. But this time, the threat looming beyond those limestone barriers was unlike anything they had ever faced. The shadow of the Assyrian, beyond the walls, lay a sight that would freeze the blood of the bravest warrior. A vast army, numerous as the sands of the sea and dark as a plague of locusts, choked the valleys and hills surrounding the holy city. These were the Assyrians, the undisputed masters of war in the ancient world. They were not merely soldiers, they were the architects of cruelty, a superpower known for flaying their enemies alive, burning cities to ash, and dragging entire populations into humiliating exile. 185,000 soldiers. They were highly trained, ruthlessly disciplined, and implacable. Their armor glinted under the harsh sun by day and formed a sea of iron by night. They were a machine that had never known a jam, a wave that had never broken. Leading this devastating force was Sennacherib, king of Assyria. He was a man whose reputation preceded his footsteps like the rumble of thunder announcing a catastrophic storm. Sennacherib was not just a strategist, he was a narcissist of violence. He did not simply want to defeat his enemies, he wanted to erase them. His strategy went beyond winning battles. He sought to shatter the human spirit. He made a theater of his cruelty, using propaganda and terror to ensure that those he conquered were broken long before the first arrow flew. Jerusalem now found itself staring into the abyss of this man's ambition. The terror within, inside the walls, the atmosphere was one of distilled terror. The air was thick with the scent of fear, a mix of unwashed bodies, smoke from dwindling fires, and the metallic tang of anxiety. Every day that the siege dragged on brought a fresh wave of despair to the hearts of the people. The sounds of the city were heart-wrenching. Mothers rocked weeping infants, trying to soothe them with milk that was running dry because the mothers themselves were starving. The wails of children echoed through the narrow alleyways, unanswered by fathers who stood on the walls, staring blankly at their own doom. The soldiers charged with the defense of Jerusalem were ghosts in armor. They were exhausted, their eyes sunken, their bodies weakened by rationing. They looked at their swords and spears, and then they looked over the battlements of the ocean of Assyrian iron, and they knew the math. Their weapons were useless against such magnitude. At night, sleep was a stranger to them. When they did close their eyes, they were tormented by vivid nightmares of the massacre to come, the fires, the screams, the chains of slavery. The burden of the king, in the royal palace, King Hezekiah sat in a solitude that felt heavy enough to crush bones. He could not hide the overwhelming weight that rested on his shoulders. A king's burden is always heavy, but this was different. He knew his responsibility extended far beyond military decisions or logistical rationing. He carried on his back the future of the covenant people. He carried the fate of every trembling family, every innocent child, every fragile elder huddling in the dark. Walking slowly through the stone corridors of the palace, his footsteps echoing in the silence, Hezekiah could hear the frightened murmurs of his people. He saw the look in the eyes of his citizens when he passed a silent, screaming question, "Is there any hope left?" His military advisors, men of war and strategy, had grown silent. They had drawn up plans, debated tactics, and reviewed the fortifications, but they had ultimately exhausted all strategic alternatives. The reality was stark. The reserves of food and water were dangerously low. The morale of the population was fracturing like brittle glass. Every morning that the sun rose over the Mount of Olives felt like a new death sentence. Sennacherib, playing his cruel game, continued to send messengers to the gates. They didn't just demand surrender, they practiced psychological warfare. They shouted insults in the Hebrew tongue so the common people on the wall could understand. They blasphemed the name of Yahweh, asking the people why they trusted in a God who, according to the Assyrians, was just like the weak gods of the other nations they had already burned. Deep within his soul, Hezekiah lived in a profound conflict between his duty as a sovereign and his personal faith. He was a good king, a reformer, a man who sought God, but fear is a powerful acid. Had God truly abandoned them? Was Jerusalem destined to become just another pile of rubble in the Assyrian annals? Just like Samaria, just like Hamath, just like Arpad. The doubt tormented him daily, gnawing at his resolve. Yet, amidst this crushing anguish, there remained a tiny, stubborn spark of hope. It was a faint memory of the power that had parted the Red Sea, the power that had toppled Jericho. Something inside him refused to let go of the belief that, despite the mountain of evidence to the contrary, the heavens could intervene. In this impossible situation, faith was no longer just a virtue to be practiced in times of peace. It was the only lifeline left. Hezekiah knew that when human strength reaches its absolute limit, the only option remaining is to turn to the divine. But in those dark hours, he could not have conceived that he was about to witness one of the most silent, efficient, and terrifying miracles in the history of the cosmos. The war of words, Sennacherib's ambition, went beyond territory. He wanted to humiliate the God of Israel. He wanted to stand on Mount Zion and proclaim that Yahweh was powerless against the might of Assyria. To achieve this, the Assyrian king utilized his most potent weapon, words. He sent letters and messengers to the wall. The Rabshakeh, the chief cupbearer of the Assyrian king, stood within earshot of the defenders and shouted, "On whom do you depend, that you rebel against me? Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. Has any god of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Who among all the gods of these lands has delivered their land from my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem?" These words were arrows dipped in poison. They penetrated the hearts of the defenders more deeply than iron. The psychological warfare was brilliant and brutal. The soldiers on the wall began to look at each other with haunted eyes. They began to silently question if there was indeed a God listening to their prayers. The environment inside the city suffocated under the weight of this doubt. It was a slow poison. The uncertainty weakened the grip of the swordsman and sapped the will of the mason repairing the breaches. The prayer of desperation. It was in this atmosphere of complete impotence that King Hezekiah made a decision that defied military logic. He did not convene a council of war. He did not inspect the armory. Moved by the humble desperation of his faith, the king walked alone. He shed his royal robes and donned sackcloth, the garment of mourning and humility. Without an escort, without his generals, He walked toward the temple of the Lord. He carried no sword, he carried no shield. In his hands, he held only a piece of parchment, the letter full of threats, insults, and blasphemies written by Sennacherib. His steps were slow, heavy with the grief of his people. He entered the courts of the temple, a place of silence and shadows. He approached the altar, and there, in a gesture of profound vulnerability, Hezekiah knelt. His hands trembled as he took the letter and spread it out physically before the Lord, as if showing a piece of evidence to a judge. With tears streaming down his face and a voice choked with emotion, Hezekiah cried out from the depths of his soul, "O Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations and their lands. So now, O Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone." In that moment, he was not a powerful sovereign. He was a desperate child. He acknowledged the reality the Assyrians were strong. They had destroyed other nations. He did not deny the facts. He simply appealed to a higher truth. The divine verdict, while Hezekiah's prayer echoed softly in the empty temple elsewhere in the city, hidden from the panic of the crowds, the answer was already being formulated. The prophet Isaiah, the man who had long served as the mouthpiece of the divine, received a revelation. It came with crystalline clarity. It was not a message of hold on a little longer or fight bravely. It was a verdict. God sent word to Hezekiah through Isaiah. The message contained no military tactics. It was a simple, terrifyingly powerful promise. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return, and he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Isaiah felt the tremors of the supernatural in this message. The Assyrian king had raged and boasted, but he had engaged in a battle with a foe he could not see. The response to Jerusalem would not come from human hands. The intervention would be direct, divine, and absolute. The silent night fell over the besieged city. It was a darkness deeper than usual. Inside Jerusalem, the exhausted populace tried to sleep, clutching their children, whispering final prayers. The sentries on the walls paced nervously, peering into the gloom, straining to hear the sounds of siege engines moving into position. They expected that at dawn, the assault would begin. They expected the ladders, the battering rams, the fire. Outside the walls, the contrast was stark. The Assyrian camp was a sprawling city of tents, stretching for miles. Campfires flickered like a reflection of the stars. The soldiers, 185,000 strong, slept the deep sleep of the arrogant. They were confident. They had never lost. They knew that tomorrow they would breach the walls, loot the temple, and add another victory to their king's legacy. They felt untouchable, but as the moon climbed high into the sky, the atmosphere shifted. A silence fell over the Assyrian camp, a silence that was unnatural. The crickets stopped chirping. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Without a sound, without a flash of lightning, without a single trumpet blast, the angel of the Lord descended. This was not a battle. A battle implies two sides fighting. This was a decree. The celestial being moved through the rows of tents. It was a presence of pure holiness and judgment moving through a field of pride. There was no struggle. No soldier drew a sword. No guard raised an alarm. No cry for help pierced the night air. The angel moved with a terrifying efficiency. It was the power of life and death, distilled into a single agent of the divine. As the entity passed, the breath of life was simply withdrawn. Heart stopped mid-beat, lungs ceased to fill. The electrical impulses of the brain quieted instantly. One by one, thousand by thousand, the mighty warriors of Assyria, the men who had terrorized the known world, who had boasted of their strength, sank into an eternal sleep. The general in his command tent, the infantryman by the fire, the archer with his bow beside him, all were touched by the invisible hand. It was a judgment conducted in absolute quiet. The God of Israel did not need to make a spectacle of noise to prove his power. He simply acted. The morning of awe, the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. The first rays of dawn touched the limestone walls of Jerusalem. The sentries on the walls rubbed their eyes, steeling themselves for the sight of the forming Assyrian ranks. They expected the roar of thousands of men waking, the clang of armor, the shouts of officers, but there was only silence. The birds began to sing, but the valley below remained still. A confused murmur rippled along the wall. Why are they not moving? Is it a trick? Are they waiting? Hezekiah ordered scouts to investigate, though fear still clutched at their throats. The scouts crept out of the city gates, moving cautiously toward the silent sea of tents. They approached the first perimeter guard. The man was standing, leaning on his spear, but he was unnaturally still. A scout reached out and touched him. The guard toppled over, cold and stiff. They moved further in. They looked into the tents, bodies everywhere. Men lying in their bedrolls, looking as if they were asleep, but with faces pale and chests still. There was no blood, there were no wounds. It was as if their souls had simply been summoned away in the night. 185,000 men gone. The scouts ran back to the city, their faces pale not with fear of the enemy, but with the fear of God. They shouted the news to the gatekeepers. They are dead, they are all dead. The news spread like wildfire through the streets of Jerusalem. The Assyrians are dead, the camp is silent. People poured out of their houses. The king came to the wall. As the sun fully illuminated the valley, the extent of the event became clear. The army that had threatened to wipe them off the face of the earth had been dismantled without a single arrow being fired from Jerusalem. A profound, shaking reverence descended upon the people. The cheering did not start immediately. First, there was shock, then a holy trembling. They walked among the tents of their enemies and realized that no human hand had done this, no strategy had achieved this. Hezekiah looked out over the field of the fallen and felt the weight of his prayer answered. He realized that while he was sleeping, while he was powerless, the God of Israel had been working. The few Assyrian survivors, including King Sennacherib, who had been spared to witness the destruction of his pride, fled in shame. The king of terror returned to Nineveh, not as a conqueror, but as a man haunted by the silent power of the God of Zion. History tells us he would later be murdered by his own sons in the temple of his God, a final irony for the man who mocked the true God. The legacy of the night, that morning in 701 BC, was etched forever into the memory of the Hebrew people. It became a testimony passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter. It was the ultimate proof that salvation belongs to the Lord. Jerusalem understood, perhaps for the first time in generations, that God fights battles in dimensions that humans cannot perceive. They learned that the most powerful weapon they possessed was not a sword, but a prayer offered in humility. They learned that silence does not mean inactivity. The event passed into history as the night God fought alone. It stands as a monument to the sovereignty of the Creator over the powers of the earth. It is a reminder that the loudest threats often crumble before the quietest whispers of the divine. The echo for today, but this story is not merely a dusty relic of antiquity. It is a living narrative that speaks directly to our lives today, right where we are, right in the midst of our own sieges. We all face our own Assyrians, We face problems that seem vast, numerous, and cruel. We face diagnoses, debts, broken relationships, and addictions that surround us like an army of iron. We hear the voices of the messengers whispering in our ears, voices of depression, anxiety, and doubt telling us that there is no hope, that God has abandoned us, that we should just surrender. We feel the siege, we feel the resources running low. We feel the sleepless nights. But the story of Hezekiah and the silent night teaches us a profound truth. Never underestimate the power of God operating in the silence. Just because you cannot see the solution does not mean God is not crafting it. Just because you cannot hear the battle does not mean God is not fighting it. You have never been, nor will you ever be, truly alone. The same God who defended Jerusalem is present in your life. He is active. He is moving heaven and earth in your favor. He works in the night, in those dark times when you are asleep, or when you are too exhausted to fight, or when you have simply run out of strength. Hezekiah's role was to spread the letter before God and trust. God's role was the victory. So if you feel surrounded today, if the enemy is shouting at your walls, do what Hezekiah did. Take your problem, spread it out before the Lord, and acknowledge your inability to fix it. Then, trust in the silence. Believe that while you wait, the angel of the Lord is moving through the camp of your enemies. Believe that the dawn is coming. Believe that you will wake up to find that the thing which threatened to destroy you has been removed by a hand you could not see. Trust in the divine silence, for it is often in the quietest moments that the greatest miracles are performed. Thank you for journeying through this extraordinary moment in history. If this story touched your heart, if it renewed a spark of hope within you, do not keep it to yourself. Share this message with someone who feels besieged today. Remind them that God has not stopped fighting for His people, and He is fighting silently, powerfully, for you right now.